A woman visits her friend's apartment in Tokyo for the first time. She's been warned to expect something small, smaller than her own living room, and on the train over, she's already pictured the usual result of a life that's run out of room. Boxes stacked on boxes. Furniture pushed against walls because there was nowhere else to put it. At the door, she takes off her shoes, as instructed, without fully understanding why yet, and steps inside. The apartment breathes. There's a low table in the center of the room with nothing on it. A single shelf holds maybe a dozen objects, each placed as if chosen rather than accumulated. Light moves low and even across a floor with nothing interrupting it. There is, impossibly, space in an apartment a third the size of her own. "How is this smaller than my place?" she finally asks. "But it feels bigger." Her friend laughs, because she's heard the question before, almost word for word, from nearly everyone who visits. The honest answer has almost nothing to do with square meters, and almost nothing to do with how much her friend owns. It has everything to do with a handful of quiet decisions, some centuries old, some just clever engineering, and one barely more than a daily habit most visitors walk straight past without ever noticing it's the actual reason the room works. That first decision starts right where she took off her shoes. Traditional Japanese homes have a genkan, a small sunken entryway sitting just below the main floor. Its stated job is simple. Shoes come off there, dirt stays outdoors. But researchers studying transition rituals, the same field examining a pilot's pre-flight checklist or a surgeon's scrubbing routine, have found something more interesting underneath that simple act. A small, repeated physical action at a boundary tells the nervous system that one context has ended and another has begun. Without that ritual, the brain tends to drag whatever came before straight through the door with you. A stressful commute doesn't end at the threshold, it quietly continues under the surface of dinner. The genkan interrupts that. You must stop, bend down, physically remove the layer of yourself that touched the outside world before you're let all the way in. It takes about 11 seconds, and in those 11 seconds something in the mind resets, the way a screen clears itself before the next thing loads. You don't need a traditional Japanese home to use this. You need 11 seconds, and a boundary you decide to respect. One mat by your door, one rule that shoes only come off there. One deliberate breath before you cross into your own home. Walking further into the apartment, toward that shelf with its dozen chosen objects, one looks at first glance like almost nothing. A single square of cloth. This is a furoshiki, and for centuries, long before shopping bags and gift wrap, and the modern explosion of single-purpose containers filling every cupboard, this one piece of fabric quietly did the job that dozens of separately owned, rarely used objects now do instead. Folded one way, it becomes a bag for groceries. Folded another, it wraps a bottle as a gift, no tape required. Knotted differently, it becomes a laundry bundle, a lunchbox cover, or padding sturdy enough to carry a fragile bowl across town. One object, a dozen functions, called up by nothing more than the way it's folded that day. This is actually a direct answer to something psychologists call the paradox of choice. Research on decision-making has found that beyond a certain point, more available options don't make people more capable, they make them slower, more anxious, and paradoxically less satisfied with whatever they eventually choose, because some part of the brain stays aware of everything that wasn't picked. A home stocked with a single-purpose object for every task is a home built, room by room, on exactly this paradox. A dedicated gift bag drawer. A shelf of container sizes for every kind of leftover. A cupboard of tools bought for one job each, most used once a year if that. Each object felt like it added convenience the moment it was purchased. Together, they add decisions, dozens of small ones every day, about which object out of many is correct for this exact task. The furoshiki philosophy inverts this. Instead of owning many things that each do one job well, you own fewer things that each do many jobs adequately. The mental cost isn't paid at the moment of use, the way it is with a drawer full of specialized options. It's paid once, upfront, when you learn how your handful of objects can flex. After that, the decision essentially disappears. You have the cloth, you fold it the way this moment requires, and you move on. Look again at that low table. In an hour, it won't be there. It folds flat and slides beneath the shelf without a trace. Look at the floor beneath it. Tatami mats woven from rice straw, firm enough to sit on, forgiving enough to sleep on. Look at the closet built into the far wall, deep enough to swallow an entire folded futon during the day, and release it again the moment night falls. This one small room is, depending entirely on the hour, a dining room, a sitting room, a workspace, and a bedroom. Not because the family living here somehow owns 4 rooms worth of furniture crammed into one space, but because they own almost nothing that can't fold, stack, or disappear the instant its job is finished. This idea has a name in Japanese design philosophy: simplicity through active removal, clearing away anything that isn't doing real work right now, so what remains can be seen clearly and used fully, without competing for attention against things sitting idle in the background. There's a genuinely practical reason this matters. Cognitive load research shows your brain processes everything currently in your visual field, whether you're actively using it or not. A room full of furniture you're not using right now isn't neutral. It's a room full of low-grade, ongoing mental work, dozens of small objects, each a fragment of attention you never consciously agreed to spend. Studies on visual attention have found that cluttered environments measurably compete with the brain's limited focus, making it harder to concentrate even on unrelated tasks. The mess doesn't need to be dramatic for the effect to show up. It just needs to be present, visible, and permanent. A room that folds away what it isn't using right now is a room quietly engineered to only ever show your brain what's relevant in this hour. The bed you're not sleeping in isn't visible while you eat. The table you're not eating at isn't visible while you sleep. One room, behaving like several, each one honest about its current purpose. There's one more object worth pulling off that shelf, and it's the smallest of all: a plain notebook, its pages ruled into narrow columns. This is a household ledger, a kakibo, handwritten, usually kept by the same hand for years, sometimes decades. It asks you to do something almost nobody does anymore. Write down, by hand, every amount of money that leaves your hands on the day it leaves them. Not categorized automatically by an app. Not summarized once a month in a notification you glance at and dismiss. Written in your own hand, in the moment. This sounds almost too simple to matter, until you look at what behavioral economists have found about how the brain handles money. Research on mental accounting shows people don't experience money as one single pool the way a bank statement suggests they should. We split it mentally into separate buckets: rent money, fun money, money that somehow doesn't quite count because it went on a card instead of cash. The buckets we don't watch closely are exactly the ones that quietly drain. A kakibo makes every bucket visible on purpose, in ink. Not to shame anyone into spending less, but simply to close the gap between what you believe you're spending and what you're actually spending. A gap that for most people turns out to be considerably wider than expected. The notebook itself costs less than a cup of coffee. What it removes is the low hum of not quite knowing, which turns out to be its own kind of clutter, just the financial version of it. There's a word connecting all of these decisions, and you may already have heard it without knowing its full weight. Matanai. Loosely, what a waste. But the philosophy underneath is more precise than the phrase suggests. Matanai isn't only about not wasting food, money, or objects. It's about not wasting anything that still has potential left in it, including your own attention and your own effort. The Genkan doesn't waste the transition between outside and inside. It uses it. The furoshiki doesn't waste the versatility already built into one piece of cloth by pushing you to buy 10 single-purpose replacements. It uses what's already there. The folding table and built-in closet don't waste the room when it isn't needed for one specific purpose. They let it keep working differently an hour later. And the Kakebo doesn't waste the information your own spending has been generating all along. It simply writes it down instead of letting it evaporate. None of this is deprivation. Nobody in that Tokyo apartment goes without. They have a table. They have a bed. They know exactly where this month's money went. What they don't have is the invisible tax most homes pay without ever noticing, the tax of owning things and habits that only work one way, that only serve 1 hour of the day, that only ever ask something of your attention and never once give a decision back. Here's what a few thousand years of quiet Japanese design refinement suggests you do, tonight, not next weekend. First, build yourself a Genkan, even without a traditional entryway. Pick one mat, one spot by your door, and make a rule. Shoes off there and only there, every time. Give the boundary its 11 seconds before you step past it. Second, find one object in your home that only ever does one job, and ask whether something you already own could handle that job just as well. You're looking for the version of that furoshiki idea already sitting unnoticed in your own cupboards. Third, look at the one piece of furniture you use for the fewest hours a day, and ask what it would take to fold it, move it, or clear it when it isn't in use. You need one object that stops permanently occupying a room it only temporarily serves. Fourth, find a notebook, any notebook, and write down tonight everything you spent money on today, not categorized, not summarized, just written in your own hand the way it actually happened. 4 small decisions. None cost close to anything, and each removes a small, repeated tax your attention has been quietly paying, possibly for years, without you ever naming it out loud. The woman in that Tokyo apartment eventually asks her friend the question everyone eventually asks, "Don't you ever want more space?" And her friend gives the answer that takes a while to understand. "I don't have less space. I just don't waste any of it."